Okay. Well, welcome back. If indeed you left and then came back, and if you stayed, well, thank you. And at least you've got the seat that you wanted. We actually are moving now into our first panel for the day. We've actually got two set aside for the day. This morning's one, though, is about what does it take to build an eco-village. I'm going to hand over to Renee, who is part of the CURRUMBIN Eco-Village, and Renee's going to moderate this conversation and allow everyone to introduce themselves. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear the volume okay? So this panel is specifically for what it takes to create or build an eco-village. And we would just ask if you have a question for a specific panel member, please announce that in the beginning, or if it's for the entire panel, that'll be equally appreciated. And then just come up to the microphone as you have a question, state your name, and then try to keep the question as short as possible so that we can get to as many questions as we can. We've got about 20 minutes, I think, overall. So what we'll start off doing is having each of the panel members, just very briefly, you've got about 30 to 40 seconds, to say your name, where you're located, and then what it is that you do that's aligned with this topic about what it takes to build an eco-village. So, Ben, if you want to go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, I sort of got this passion for eco-villages and sustainable living probably 20 years ago when I was in Canberra, and we formed a Canberra Co-housing Association, and these things take a long time to start up, but yeah, that was around for about 5 years, and I just recently found that they've just restarted it, and they didn't realise the original one was there, 20s. So that was quite an interesting full circle. But yeah, that's where I certainly got my first passion, and then yeah, I sort of had a consulting job in Canberra in technology, and sort of said I'm passionate about that. Oh, I'm good about that. I'm good at it. And I like doing it, but I'm not passionate about it. So I thought, where does my passion lie? And I got involved in this co-housing stuff and made a lot of great friends. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So I actually moved my whole life up. I quit my job, lost a lot of income, and came up here to CURRUMBIN Eco-Village and help Land Matters finish the village. And I've been involved operationally since then. So quite a life-changing experience, but I don't regret a minute of it. And it was always intentional. It was always about getting kids and bringing them up in an environment where they felt safe, they felt loved, and they had many parents, and yeah, all that sort of stuff. So that's where I sort of came from.
Thanks, Ben.
Hello, my name's Jason. I come from a farming background, and I've been an organic farmer, a veggie farmer, as well as being a project manager and a number of other different career changes. And just very recently, I immersed in a study, PhD study, looking at intentional communities around the world, and coming up to the end of that study, and really pleased to be able to share knowledge. That's with the University of Queensland. Really pleased to be able to share knowledge in that, and I'm at a point in my life where I would like to roll up my sleeves and get on with being part of building more communal living arrangements. Yeah.
Thanks, James. Hi, I'm Morag Gamble. I'm an eco-villager through and through. I think I've been living in one for at least 20 years in an eco-village at Crystal Waters, but before then in a whole range of different communities. So my passion and interest is actually working with people to engage in getting involved in the community side, the connecting and the design side. So I mentioned all of that before. And yeah, I totally encourage you to explore this more because it's just a beautiful world.
Thanks, Maureen.
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm here at the invitation of Jimmy, who is organising this two-day event. I'm from STARLIGHT community, which is the oldest running community in Queensland, out near Yandina on the edge of the Blackwall Range, Mapleton National Park. I've been there for about 15 years, and I sort of stumbled into all of this with my wife moving up from Sydney, looking for a change of pace. My background is design, but also building and being hands-on. So my experience in regards to this approach to life is very much nuts and bolts, solving problems, but also learning how to work in a community that's already in place with everything that comes with it. So I'm hoping I might be able to impart some of that experience.
Thank you. My name's Ian Trew. I'm involved in representing NOOSA Forestry Tree, which is a younger intentional community. We're a small group of 15 people living in 4 houses on 160 acres in the NOOSA hinterland here. My background is of a midlife awakening when I was in my mid-20s. I joined the Defence Force Academy for the first intake when they combined Navy, Army and Air Force, and was involved in design at a high-end level, like basically designing fighter aircraft that can turn on a dime and break the sound barrier. I was completely in awe and mystified by what we, people, can do collectively, and in complete shock about what we were actually doing with it. By the time I was 21, I'd shared beers with six vets who took their own life because they couldn't stand the nightmares of what they had been put through by that system. And I walked away from a well-paid job and a respectful profession, being part of a killing industry, and went back and studied psychology and sociology. And I've been on a shoestring budget since, have gathered up with a small band of some of the dearest friends I've ever known that have. One of the successes of NOOSA Forestry Treaty is there's a whole group of us, 12 of us, that have basically been together now for about 14 years, which itself is a really interesting benchmark because that is not the norm. For all sorts of reasons, there is so many forces working against keeping us together and cooperating. And that's one of my core passions is integrated health and recognising that we are better together than we are alone. Yeah, I look forward to any of your questions.
Thank you, Ian.
Hello? Is that working? Yeah. My name's Phil Benjamin. I'm here because I've spent some time on the Belbunya community. But my first experience with community living, I guess, it was in a kibbutz 40 years ago, which was very interesting and exciting and a bit overwhelming. But having lived on Belbunya, I think I've seen the rise and the fall of that community. I haven't lived there, I guess, in the last 3 years, but it was very interesting to watch how people tried to cope with the ebbs and the flows and the financial stress that really ultimately has led to the disintegration of that community.
Thank you. And just to finish off, I'm Renee Rivard, and I am a health and wellness entrepreneur as well as a wildlife conservationist. I live at the CURRUMBIN Eco-Village, and there I'm very active in the land management, body corporate, as well as the commercial center. So as you have some questions, if you can just come to the mic here, and yes, if you can, or if you're not able or mobile, maybe you can raise your hand, but preferably please come to the mic so that everybody can hear the question. Thank you. And just state your first name and then your question, please.
My name's Susie. I'd probably pose this particularly to CURRUMBIN.
Ben?
Yep, and Crystal Waters and Morag. I believe I just noted it in that video, and I think I've read it also when I was researching about CURRUMBIN. In the report that was in the deep dive, was that deep dive thing that was on last year's report? If any of you have read it, basically I'm that Janet, but without the friends, looking for solutions to housing in the future. And there's barriers, particularly now with the Banking Royal Commission. I can borrow next to nothing, so I've got to go with the small amount that I've got. So the other thing that I've noticed that is a barrier to my desire to, one, live in a community-oriented village, and to basically not have a heavy debt for a while, is that you can't have pets. And I've always had a pet, and I don't see that changing. And I'm just wondering, are there any of these villages, because they do tend to be, and I get that, very, nature-oriented, but my pet is part of my mental health and my lifestyle. So I'm just wondering.
And you mean cat or dog?
Dog, yeah.
Oh, okay. So go ahead, Ben.
I haven't studied as many villages as Jason and the others, but I don't know of many that exclude dogs and cats. So the eco-village at CURRUMBIN is quite a rare example, I think, of that. It's against the grain. Certainly in Canberra there are suburbs that prohibit cats, or you've got to have cat cages and stuff, but maybe the others are best to answer that. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, and there's a lot of people in that boat, and I'm trying actively to find land and find investors and stitch them all together to create communities that are intentional, but also allow people that are renting to have some control as well. So there's a fine balance between the two. But yeah, I think, does other people have a comment on animals?
We're actually having a little bit of a conversation at Crystal Waters at the moment about that. You know, a few people who are living by themselves are saying, I really would like to have a pet for my mental health. But I think because of the fact that it's been established as a dog and cat free zone for such a long time, and we've all seen the impact that that's had, the conversation hasn't really gone too far, because it's just phenomenal waking up every morning being surrounded. And I know you said you get that, you know, waking up in the morning and seeing little joeys pop out of pouches and forming relationships with those animals too has been a phenomenal thing. But what I've found people are doing is making different kinds of pets. You can have an alpaca, you could have a goat, you can have a cow, you can have a chicken, you can have guinea pigs. There's all sorts of animals that are part of the kind of that productive system that give back into that whole cycle that I think are totally acceptable within that context. And so I know I can hear where you're coming from, and I get it. And my kids often say, "Oh, Mummy, can we move somewhere where we can have a dog or a cat?" And it's like, let's look at this whole picture. And they kind of say, all right, we'll just go to a friend's house and pat their dog for a bit. But like you said, I think it's this, you choose the place that you want to go to based on the kind of underlying things. And there's a few underlying, there's not many rules at places. At Crystal, there's really not that many rules. And one of them is no cats and dogs. And I do actually really get it at a deep level. But like you said, it's finding another place that does.
What's your name? Sorry. Susie. Yeah, look, Susie, I'd encourage you to look at your situation as a challenge and a blessing on you to look into it and research it and understand it. We're all involved in an experiment looking at how we're going to live on the planet. The conversation around pets at NOOSA Forestry Treat has got to the point where we've said it's not about pets or any species. You know, Morag's talked about how there's many other sorts of animals you can have relationships with. It's about behaviour. So we've had issues with people that bark more than dogs. So, you know, we've had dogs that have saved people from snake bite. You know, they've pulled a brown snake out from the bush and saved it from a tour group going through a garden that was literally 12 people about to walk across the snake. So are dogs good or bad? They're both, depending on the time, place and circumstance. It's the behaviour we look at. We've excluded free-ranging dogs and cats from certain areas, particularly in permaculture, what we'll call our Zone 5 areas, where we want them to rehabilitate and be as natural as possible, which is don't even get me started in that, in an age where you can detect radiation in every bit of air or everywhere on the planet. The whole question of natural is interesting. But I hope that, for us, the conversation is about what's acceptable behaviour and what isn't. And we acknowledge that we're all animals, and some humans probably need to be locked up and treated with a bit of love like a pet. And many pets, particularly, say, a dog that doesn't bark or isn't wild, can be a fantastic companion. So we allow dogs and cats on our property subject to certain requirements. And the main issues have been with killing wildlife and waking people up with barking at everyone. And we've had animals that have had to be removed. And we've had animals that have been with us long term and we believe have saved lives, and everyone's loved.
And it was Lynn, was it? Susie, sorry. They're looking at intentional communities throughout Australia. Pets comes up all the time as a contentious issue, but there are communities that have specifically said, well, we recognise the mental health benefits. One is Tasman EcoVillage in Tasmania. They have a policy where that if you have a pet, you come with the pet under certain rules, but you know when the pet dies, you no longer are able to have another pet. I myself I lived at Belbunya for a little while, and I had a Kelpie, and was able to come to the community. A lot of discussion with the community, but it put a lot of onus on me as a pet owner to care. So there are communities out there. My suggestion is, if this is an interest of you, find other people who also have pets and form your own new community. I know that's a big step, but it is very possible.
But we'll just add that Smarter Villages, because we're doing more urban versions, I suspect it'll be up to the residents to decide whether they want to allow dogs and cats. But I suspect because they're more urban, you know, there's not existing wildlife to be overly concerned about. So I suspect most of those would allow pets and dogs and cats and other pets. Yeah. I mean, if you look at body corporates holistically, the number one complaint in body corporates is often dogs and dog noises and stuff like that. But even if you take that out, believe it or not, we're all humans, and we'll always find something else to push to the top of that list and complain about something. So you talk to an average... I remember going on a... Sorry, segue. I went through Crystal Waters, and I went on a tour, and a lovely guy took us through, and he complained about the kangaroos eating his wallabies eating all his produce. An hour of this complaining, and we said, "Oh, so you must be looking to move out?" And he said, "Oh God, no, I'd never leave." You know, he was the happiest guy in the world, but you didn't sort of hear that through his verbal communications. But what we saw was amazing.
Alex, did you have something?
Well, we have the same rule at Starlight Community, and it has been one that's been difficult to enforce. And that's been the other aspect of it. If you are actually a community that really wants to have a dog and cat-free environment, the actual means of achieving that can be very difficult because it is a passionate thing. People who have pets do treat them like family members and have a real companionship with them, and effectively demanding someone to remove a family member from their household in order to be part of your community is a difficult ask of anybody. And so we have exceptions. There are people who still, despite those rules, will keep a cat or a dog. In some cases, they're strays and they've actually turned up on their doorstep and they've just taken a kind heart to the animal. In other cases, they've been introduced. And we do have a real struggle with this because primarily of the noise. We are also a wildlife refuge, and we do take in rehabilitated wildlife on the property because we're adjacent to National Park. That's a big consideration for us. But dogs on the whole are not a major problem for wildlife, except that they do discourage the wildlife to congregate at your property. Cats are a different story, and they are one that we are particularly not happy about having. In regards to dogs, it's mainly the noise and the problem with dogs being allowed to wander on the property. So if the owner of the dog is under the understanding that they must maintain a clear boundary for the movement of that animal and also do their best to reduce the noise within the community, then effectively the community is willing to accept the fact that that animal will be there. The only condition that we do ask beyond that, though, is that you reconsider at the end of that animal's lifetime whether it's actually something you want to continue doing again and whether you'd be prepared to not introduce another animal after that. Yeah, the hope being that you will have understood by then the extra benefits that come without having those animals.
Yeah, that's some very good points, yeah. Phil, did you have anything you wanted to add to that discussion?
No, we were just saying that there are some people that need to be locked up, in the animal, more than some of the animals.
Susie, did that help give you some clarification on that?
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Your name, please, and the question.
Hi, my name is Julie. I'm just inquiring in regards to body corporate. Is that the best type of governing thing for your villages? Because I've been involved with body corporates and they're hard.
So this is general for the panel as a whole.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Can I just... Can I ask what it is about body corporate that you find difficult, just so we can clarify the issues? Well, that's also intrinsic to community as well, and that's part of the issue. In our experience, we don't actually have a body corporate per se. We have a company title, and that's because at the time that Starlight was formed, that was really the only option available for shared ownership of the land. And it's not at all designed for community. It's designed for companies. So we have to have directors, we have to have a treasurer, we have to have a secretary, we have to make financial submissions to ASIC at every financial year. These are all things that are designed for the benefit of company. We're subject to corporations law. None of these things are related to what actually is involved with community. Now, we have several times broached the topic of actually restructuring to adopt a community title, which is essentially strata on the land, which I think is what Crystal Waters has adopted. It is something that would involve an enormous amount of expense, and we always end up at the point, well, it might be, not the best solution, but it's the one we have, let's make it work. Ultimately, in any case, that relies on the goodwill of the people involved. The biggest difficulty we have is the fact that with our structure, it's largely untested in a court of law. And this even comes down to the most basic things like collecting rates and levies and basic fees to administer the community. We've had long-standing debts which have gone 20, 25 years, and we've been unwilling to even sort of test the waters, so to speak, in terms of whether we're actually able to collect on debt and things like that. And it's only recently, in the last 4 years, that it took one of our members who works in body corporate, she actually works for a management firm, to pursue that matter to a final end. And in the end, we managed to settle on the debt. It did still not go to court though, and we still have no real idea as to whether our rules would hold up in court. And that's where body corporate on the whole has an advantage, in that the rules are essentially established, there's proper procedures involved, and you've got a fairly good foundation for structuring your procedures, whatever they go on with beyond that in terms of tailoring for each community.
I'm just mindful of time. Do you have other comments on this topic?
Yeah, it's a very big question, and I think it's something that every community that has one struggles with, and particularly for the reason that you mentioned. So Crystal Waters has two key organisations that function to help us organise things. One is the body corporate. We are a community under the Community Titles Act, and so we have a body corporate that manages basically the common land. So 80% of Crystal Waters is common land, so it's managing common land, it's managing the roads, it's managing the dams, it's managing the central water reticulation system, all those sort of common facilities. There is also 6% of the land which is held in common and is managed by a cooperative, which is kind of a remnant from the original community that existed there. And so the community, if you've ever come to Crystal Waters, the village green where there's the bakery and the market and the community events and all that kind of stuff, that happens on the cooperative land. And so as a community, we kind of get together to do all that social stuff. So there's two main organisations. What happens though is that there is a lot of really bad discussions that happen around really simple things. One of the things that I learned when I was involved in helping to set up North East Street City Farm was that it's actually a lot to do with the process in which, when you focus on the stuff that you have to do but not think about how you do it or the people that are involved in it or skilling people up, because everyone who's pretty much on that body corporate, they're not professional community managers, or they don't come with the skill set necessarily that will enable them to make good decisions, to respect other people's voices, and that's a learnt skill. So some people have been on it for a while, get better at it, but other people can come on and just kind of blow it out of the water. So I think actually, and we're still learning at this, very much still learning at this, but from my perspective, I see that we need to set in place a capacity to train people, to create platforms where, as a community, we're constantly learning. and that we learn about how to make decisions, how to resolve conflict, how to speak non-violently to one another. All of those things have to be embedded within it. And one of the things I think I would like to see, we have a roads manager, we have a dams manager, or weeds manager, this manager, that manager, but we don't have a community manager. There's no focus on cultivating community. And so I think, we've been around for 30 odd years, so there's still a shift and change that needs to happen. But somehow I think a lot of that kind of stuff happens incidentally. And I think if we tried to manage it from that system, if we just go, okay, body corporate, body corporate does roads, dams, that's okay, we'll deal with that in a very structured way that you need to. The rest of the stuff can be fluid. And it was really exciting the other day to actually see that there are groups that form all over the place doing things. So the people interested in doing the childcare stuff, get and organise that. The people who are interested in the art stuff, do that. The music, all those things are self-organising, and we don't need to have bureaucratic structures to make them happen. We do just simply by having a space where we can do that together, which is where the cooperative comes in. So I think somehow taking the sort of managing people out of those rigid structures, just putting those things in is probably a good idea, and training ourselves up and recognising that we always need to improve how we communicate, and it's a lifelong process.
Thank you, Morag. Yeah, we'll just know we've got about 3 minutes left or so. So yeah, Ian, use the microphone next to Phil. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, Morag makes some amazing points there. Look, community living isn't a widget like a can of Coca-Cola that's perfected or unperfected, I'm not sure it's a good analogy, and sold as a known entity like McDonald's all over the land. And that's fantastic, because it's an opportunity. One of the things we teach in permaculture is that the problem is the solution. The fantastic thing about that is it empowers an individual to take responsibility for their own lives. As soon as you do that, you've achieved 80% of the goals of yoga or Zen. You've got to live in the moment. You've got to think. You've got to respond to the environment socially and ecologically around you. And that's a fantastic thing. With respect to the law, can I just see a show of hands? How many people in this room have read the Australian Constitution? An absolute minority. I'd say not even 10%. Okay? The Australian, how many here have seen the Australian Constitution? Still not even 25%. Our Constitution is one of the most recent legal documents on the planet championing democracy and freedom of will.
You've got about 30 seconds.
And there's a lot of leeway towards what you can do. Just because it's the law doesn't mean that it's enforceable, because there's a lot of caveats, starting with freedom of religion, which includes the right not to be questioned on your religion. So if you have an ecological-based religion, you can start a religion, that's your right. You've got a lot of power in court if it ever comes to be questioned. And this is one of the realms where we're looking down ourselves now. We're just getting legally empowered. And that's great. It's the basis of mental health. Is to
we
be
could
empowered.
probably spend all day on these topics, but hopefully that helped answer your question, give you some information. Great, thank you so much.
Can you join me in thanking this, and seriously, this is a really sexy looking bunch of people. So, one, you're smart and you're sexy. So thank you for sharing that. Again, please thank them.